Hi, horse friends. Should you feed your horse hay before riding? The short answer is that offering forage before exercise may help protect the upper portion of your horse's stomach from damaging acid exposure. However, researchers are now studying whether hay truly reduces acid splash during exercise as effectively as horse owners have long believed. The results could eventually change how we feed performance horses before training, competition, and even routine riding. Many riders have been told that a horse should have access to hay before being ridden. Some owners give their horse a small amount of hay while grooming and tacking up. Others make sure the horse has been grazing before beginning work. The reasoning is that forage creates a fibrous mat inside the stomach, stimulates saliva production, and may help protect the sensitive upper region of the stomach from acid. That advice makes biological sense, and there is scientific support for the protective effects of forage in horses at rest. What has not been answered as clearly is whether different types of forage provide the same protection when a horse is actively exercising. That is the question researchers at the University of Queensland in Australia are now investigating through a 2-year study funded by the Grayson-Jockey Club Research Foundation. The project, led by researcher Stephanie Bond, will compare how 3 different pre-exercise feeding routines affect gastric pH while horses are actually working. The horses will complete exercise after receiving one of 3 protocols: no feed, chaff, or hay. Researchers will then compare the acidity inside the stomach under each condition. This is important because equine gastric ulcer syndrome is extremely common, especially among horses in regular work. The term equine gastric ulcer syndrome, often shortened to EGUS, does not describe one single disease. It is an umbrella term covering different forms of gastric diseases that affect different areas of the horse's stomach. The study is focused specifically on equine squamous gastric disease, or ESGD. This form affects the squamous portion of the stomach, which is the upper region above a visible dividing line known as the margo plicatus. The lower glandular portion of the stomach produces acid and has protective mechanisms designed to tolerate that acidic environment. The upper squamous portion does not have the same level of protection. If acid stomach fluid repeatedly reaches this vulnerable tissue, irritation and ulceration can develop. Horses also produce gastric acid continuously. Their digestive system evolved around consuming small amounts of forage throughout much of the day. When a horse chews, it produces saliva, and that saliva helps buffer stomach acid. Forage also creates physical material inside the stomach that may help limit how easily acid fluid reaches the upper squamous tissue. When a horse has an empty stomach, there is less fibrous material available to form that protective layer. There may also be less saliva entering the stomach because the horse is not chewing. The stomach continues producing acid even though the horse is not eating. Exercise adds another element to this process. When a horse trots, canters, jumps, gallops, or performs other athletic work, the pressure inside the abdomen increases. The stomach is compressed, and highly acidic fluid from its lower portion can be pushed upward toward the less protected squamous region. This process is commonly called acid splash. The faster and more intense the exercise becomes, the greater the potential exposure may be. That helps explain why equine squamous gastric disease is so frequently associated with training, racing, competition, and other performance demands. Published estimates vary by population and management, but the condition has been reported in very high percentages of thoroughbred racehorses during active training. However, this is not only a racehorse problem. Gastric disease can also affect show jumpers, dressage horses, barrel horses, eventers, endurance horses, and so on. Exercise is only one part of the picture. Limited forage, long periods without food, high starch meals, transportation, stall confinement, management changes, and intense competition schedule may all contribute to gastric risk. For years, the conventional recommendation has been to provide forage before exercise. The proposed explanation is that forage creates a fibrous barrier that limits acid movement while also encouraging the horse to produce acid buffering saliva. The question is whether the protective element continues during exercise and whether the type of forage matters. Measuring gastric acidity in a moving horse is surprisingly difficult. Traditional pH measurements techniques can involve placing a probe through a nasogastric tube. The problem is that the exact position of the probe may be uncertain, and it may move as the horse moves. Because acidity can vary substantially between different areas of the stomach, even a relatively small change in probe position could affect the reading. This new study will use a wireless pH capsule attached directly to the stomach lining. The capsule can continuously transmit measurements from a fixed and known location. Researchers have already demonstrated that this type of capsule can be used to record gastric pH in resting and exercising horses. That could produce a much clearer picture of what happens inside the stomach as a horse begins working. Each horse will experience all three feeding conditions in a randomized crossover design. One condition will involve no feed before exercise. Another will involve chaff, which is chop forage. The third will involve hay. Using the same horses under all three conditions helps researchers compare the effects of the feeding routines while reducing some of the natural variation that would occur if completely different groups of horses were used for each treatment. The researchers will be looking at whether any of these protocols change gastric pH or reduce the amount of time that the vulnerable squamous region is exposed to highly acidic conditions during exercise. It is essential to understand that this is an ongoing research project. The study has not yet established that hay is superior to chaff, that either option completely prevents acid splash, or that feeding forage before riding will prevent every gastric ulcer. The current information describes what researchers are planning to test, not the study's final results. That distinction matters because headlines about new research can sometimes make a question sound as though it has already been answered. In this case, the researchers are testing a widely used management practice to determine exactly how well it works under exercise conditions. Until those results are available, should horse owners continue offering forage before riding? For many horses, allowing access to appropriate forage before exercise remains consistent with common veterinary and nutritional management strategies intended to support gastric health. But that does not mean every horse should be given an unlimited amount of food immediately before intense work. The horse's overall diet, health, workload, discipline, metabolic status, dental condition, and overall risk factors all matter. The amount and type of forage must also be appropriate for that particular horse. A horse with dietary restrictions or another medical condition may require an individualized feeding plan. Timing matters as well. There is a major difference between allowing a horse to nibble appropriate forage before a normal schooling session and giving the horse a large concentrate meal shortly before demanding exercise. When we discuss feeding before riding, we are primarily talking about forage, not a large grain or concentrate meal. Concentrated feeds may contain substantial amounts of starch and sugar and do not behave inside the stomach in the same way as long stem forage. Large meals also should not be treated as a substitute for a forage-based management program. The study's comparison between hay and chaff is particularly interesting. Chaff may be easier to provide in certain situations, especially at competitions or while traveling. However, particle length, chewing time, saliva production, and the physical structure of the stomach contents could potentially influence how much protection it provides. We should not assume that all fiber sources create the same effect. That is one reason directly comparing hay, chaff, and an empty stomach during controlled exercise could be so useful. There is also an important difference between trying to reduce risk and treating existing disease. Feeding hay before riding may become one part of a gastric health management plan, but forage cannot diagnose or necessarily heal significant ulcerations by itself. Signs associated with gastric ulcers can be frustratingly vague. Some horses show a reduction in appetite, weight loss, changes in body condition, poor quality, reoccurrent mild colic, girthiness, and so on. Other horses show few obvious signs. Many of those behaviors and physical changes can also be caused by dental pain, back pain, lameness, saddle fit problems, etc. We should never assume that a horse has ulcers solely because the horse pins its ears during girthing or suddenly becomes reluctant during work. If a horse is showing a meaningful behavioral or performance change, the goal should be to identify the cause rather than simply label the behavior as an ulcer symptom. Equine squamous gastric disease and equine glandular gastric disease must also be distinguished. They occur in different tissues, may have different risk factors, and do not necessarily respond identically to management or treatment. A practice that reduces acid exposure in the squamous region may not address all the mechanisms involved in glandular disease. This new research is specifically investigating gastric pH and the risk of squamous ulcerization during exercise. We should be careful not to expand the possible findings beyond the question the study was designed to answer. Even so, this project could have a very practical impact. If one pre-exercise feeding strategy produces a measurable improvement in gastric pH, veterinarians, nutritionists, trainers, and owners may eventually have better evidence for deciding what horses should receive before work. That could affect daily routines at training barns, racetracks, riding schools, showgrounds, and private farms. Something as simple as when a horse receives hay or whether hay and chaff offer different levels of protection could become an important part of reducing gastric risk. The study may also reveal that the answer is more complicated than simply feeding or not feeding. The amount of forage, its physical form, how long the horse has been eating, the intensity of the exercise, and differences between individual horses may all influence what happens inside the stomach. That is often how good research works. It takes a familiar piece of advice and asks whether the explanation behind it can be measured under real-world conditions. For now, the most important message is not that one flake of hay will guarantee an ulcer-free horse. It will not. The message is that long gaps without forage and exercising on an empty stomach may expose the sensitive upper stomach to more acidic conditions. Appropriate forage access may be one of the most protective measures we can give. The broader plan can exclude maximizing safe and appropriate forage access, avoiding unnecessarily long fasting periods, reviewing the amount of starch in the diet, reducing avoidable management stress, introducing feeding changes gradually, and discussing any persistent symptoms with a veterinarian. For performance horses, small management decisions can add up. The horse may spend only an hour in the arena, but what happens during the many hours before and after that ride may have just as much influence on digestive health. So, should you feed your horse hay before riding? Based on what we currently understand, appropriate forage before exercise may support the horse's natural gastric defenses, and many professionals already recommend avoiding exercise after prolonged fasting. However, the University of Queensland study is designed to give us a more precise answer about what hay and chaff actually do to gastric acidity during exercise. Until the researchers publish their findings, we should view this as a promising and important research, not final proof that one feeding routine can prevent gastric ulcers. As always, we are not veterinarians, so discuss your horse's feeding plan or possible ulcer symptoms with your veterinarian. Thank you so much for joining us, and remember, I am not AI. If you listen closely, you can hear me breathing.